All right, this is the Smart Buildings Academy podcast with Michael Roper here. We also have Joe Holsey and Matt Scott over here as well joining us today. This is episode number 489. Welcome to the Smart Buildings Academy podcast. And today's episode is going to cover various topics of building automation. This is kind of like a roundtable of many topics. We're going to get into commissioning. We'll also talk about new construction versus retrofit, the trends that are going on in that. We'll also get into naming conventions, what that deals with graphics or maybe the configuration part of our programs. And then we'll get into some controller programming, whether we're seeing more templates being used or maybe custom logic. And then we'll also maybe get into some owner training if we have time today. We'll be talking about the importance of owner training and how to get your technicians ready to do that. All right. And as usual, all information that's going to be covered in this episode can be found on our website, podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/489. All right. So that gives our introduction, gentlemen. How's everybody doing today? Everybody doing okay?
Doing well. How
Yeah,
about yourself,
good,
Matt?
Doing great.
Good,
doing
good.
great.
Yeah, it's a Friday here as we're recording this, so it's a good day for a Friday.
It is.
Correct.
It
Yep.
is.
Well, good deal. Well, what I want to do, guys, is I want to start off with just talking about a few different topics. The first topic that we have that I'm going to talk about that I feel like it's really important is commissioning our building automation systems. A lot of times they're going to commission it in the beginning, and that's the only time they'll do it in their life. So we're going to talk about commissioning and retro commissioning. You guys know what retro commissioning is?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
tell us what
I
retro
assume-
commissioning is.
I assume when you're talking about retro commissioning, you're talking about coming back after the fact and
Exactly.
and recommissioning, or sometimes it could be the first time it's commissioned if it was never commissioned properly to start with. So
Good point.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Never been commissioned.
taking an existing building system and commissioning it with what's new or now.
Right, recommissioning it, getting it up to
Yeah.
date. Okay, so I got a few questions we're going to ask on this panel here about this topic. The number one question I have here is I'd like for your input to see, why do so many BAS projects still skip or underfund commissioning? We see this a lot out in the field, and sometimes people just skip over it. Why do you guys think that this is so common?
Well, I think skipping commissioning is very common, not just in building automation, but in a lot of different trades in general. And it should not be, because a lot of people view it just more as something convenient for the customer rather than something necessary to ensure that the job is done right. Now, a lot of times you do have the weight of, say, an engineer or some type of inspector that's going to come back and want to see those commissioning documents. So I think that's a great thing. But when you don't have that oversight, I think it's oftentimes just viewed as added cost, added time, added
Yeah.
resources.
Yep.
And if we
Yep.
can get by without it, let's just skim by and wait till there's a problem before we come back. So
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely. I was going to add to that. Yeah, budget constraints. I mean, the fact that maybe it's just not in the budget, or as Joe said, it's seen as an additional cost that might not feel as necessary as just the install process.
yep. Good points.
they're
And
also
also-
burnt out. By the time you're done with the job,
Yeah,
you're
you're
ready to
burnt
get out
out.
of there. You got
There you
another
go.
job that's lined up back there, and you're like, yeah, that's
Yeah.
done. Let's go. Oh,
Yep,
we never
trying to
went
get it
back
done
and
as fast as we can.
commissioned that, did we? Yeah.
Yep, good points. I like those points. Also, I feel like sometimes owners might not understand the value of recommissioning. Retro commissioning might. There's a
Mhm.
lot of different terms for it: continuous commissioning, recommissioning. What I would recommend, I used to do this with my BAS service agreements all the time. When I'd price those up, I'd always put at least an option for the customer for continuous commissioning, because a lot of times they don't even know it's out there. They don't even know that you're supposed to do this. Every 2 years or so, it's always a good rule of thumb to recommission the system if you have the resources available there.
Yeah, I think that's a
Yeah,
really good
makes
point too. Going back to what we had started off earlier, the value of the recommissioning versus the initial, because we all know sensors go down, things get out of calibration. I mean, you're going to
Yeah.
need to come in there and make sure that it's operating right. And
Mhm.
one of the other big things that I've seen a lot is user overrides.
Oh,
People can
yeah.
go in there and override things and forget about it, or
Mhm.
change things, but they really never should have touched it. So it's good to have that professional to come back in every so often, like you said. Go
Yep.
ahead, recommission that stuff. Make sure we're still running properly.
That's
Yeah,
great point.
Yeah,
Yep.
definitely. And also, I mean, with the recommissioning, it's as we, move forward, we have a lot of new technology,
Mm.
and things are continuously getting updated and new equipment is being installed. And so we need to make sure that those are always talking and they're always calibrated right and all the sequences are correct. And sometimes that gets lost with no commissioning or no recommissioning.
Right.
Mhm.
That's a really good point when you brought up the new equipment that may be, some of the new inverter driven equipment that may operate different. It may
Yeah,
not need the same type of sequence as the old equipment
exactly.
did. And so you've got no professional eyes looking at that. There's nobody going
Yep.
in there updating it. That's a really good point.
Mhm. Yep, and also I'll just add too, recommissioning can also find, like Joe said, failed sensors or maybe overrides that are stuck in override all the time. Also, calibration's a big deal on
Yep.
that to make sure your CO2 sensors are in tolerance, temperature and humidity, and all those type of sensors.
Yep.
Another thing too that's also great for retro commissioning is just to make sure the sequences are being implemented properly or even enabled. Sometimes if they're having an issue with some kind of a system, they might disable the program that has a sequence that could
Mhm.
have been intended to do like energy efficiency, and now they disabled it, and then they just wasted all their money that they invested in by having someone write the program. So things like
Right.
that are very important to check up on.
That's exactly right. And you hit another one big there's the energy efficiency. If nothing
Mm,
else,
Yeah.
making sure that your equipment's operating as efficiently as possible,
yeah.
Yep.
extend the life of
Absolutely.
it, make sure it's doing what it's supposed to do, make sure you're getting the savings you need. So
Yeah,
Exactly.
definitely, and doing that by checking set points, right? Making sure set points aren't too high, too low.
Mhm.
Obviously
right.
not just energy, but discomfort as well. So making sure we hit all of those points for recommissioning.
Yep. Very good. Good points, gentlemen. All right, let's go to the next question on commissioning. This will be our last one, then we'll move on to the next topic. What role do BAS technicians play in successful commissioning? What's their role?
So obviously, I think a BAS tech is critical to it. I mean, they're crucial to it. I guess we have different types of techs out there. Some may be an installation specialist, whereas others may be, service troubleshooting. But all in all, the technician is going to be the one that understands the system. They know how it's supposed to work. In
Mm,
connection with the engineers and the design procedures and everything. So they're going to be the ones when they go out there to commission it. For instance, if there is an issue, hopefully they'll be the ones knowledgeable enough to go out there, find the issue and correct the
Yeah.
issue
mhm.
rather
Yep.
than, just some office personnel or somebody that you may send out there.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely. Not only troubleshooting, but as you mentioned, the testing and verifying, making sure there's no issues. And yeah, there's a lot that they can do. Obviously, with the system configuration and making sure all of our systems are working properly together. There's a lot of those types that, yeah, as Joe mentioned, that we might not want some random person working on.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I had to usually a lot of times the BAS techs can spot mechanical issues before they become failures
Mhm.
because they're going to
Mm,
have access to look at the
yeah.
trend logs, they access to the alarm log. They might see if a compressor keeps short cycling and it's being trended in the system. So they're going to be able to identify a mechanical issue before it happens potentially. If there's something, I don't know, Joe knows more about the mechanical side about a compressor, why it would be short cycling or something like that. But that
Mhm.
would be something they can look at and hopefully fix it before they have to buy a new compressor. So that's just one example on that
Yeah.
as far as that goes.
Also, yeah, also for BAS technicians, I mean, a lot of times I assume that they're able to provide training to whoever's operating it
Mhm.
and kind of bridge that gap for anything that the owner or the operator doesn't know. And so I'm sure the technician can kind of help train whoever's going to be operating the systems.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
speaking of the operators a little bit, you're right, Michael. A lot of times the operators are not HVAC mechanics or electrical, specialist engineers. So a lot of times they don't really know what they're really looking at. They just know whether a space is cool or warm or not. And if there's a problem, they may call another company out. So that's a
Yep.
really good point. You've got a technician looking at it. As Matt said, you can bridge that gap. You can kind of train that owner a little bit of why it's doing what it's doing.
Yep. Very good.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to add one more thing before we go to the next one, unless anybody has something.
Mhm.
One of the features of commissioning is test and balance and making
Mm,
sure test and balance is
yep.
good. So a good technician will be able to help out the test and balance agent if we have to override set points, override dampers, speed up fans, slow down fans, or if the technician's training a test and balance agent how to use their software. a good technician, that's the role they're going to play in recommissioning as well.
Right.
Yeah. One quick thing I'll add to that with being a good technician is documenting everything.
Mm,
And a big part of that is looking into the future and, having maintenance records for everything so that when some new maintenance guy comes in, he'll have a actual documentation or understanding of, this piece of equipment's had 3 motors replaced. Maybe there's more to it. And so I would say a good technician would have that documentation and actually have good details on it as well.
yep, I would agree. That's a great point, Matt, for sure. Yep. All right. Anything else before we go to the next topic? Are we good? All right. My next topic, we're going to talk about some trends that we're seeing. And we're mainly, Joe and Matt and I were getting this from our students that we see and some of the mentors we talk to, just some ideas of what's going on out in the field, some trends in new construction, and also some trends in retrofits in the BAS world. Okay. So, my first question, we're going to jump into the new construction side of it. And I'm going to ask this question here. Are BAS designs and new construction becoming more standardized, or are they becoming more customized? Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a twofold answer. I mean, I would say both. I think for the
Okay.
more customized, we have our more complex buildings, like some of our high-tech hospitals or
Mhm.
multi-building campuses where we're using a geothermal system in multiple buildings. But then we also have our more standardized, like our cookie cutter, schools or our retail spaces. So I think it kind of depends on the space, is what we're seeing.
Mhm. Right.
Yeah, I agree. One thing I see a lot from my students, though, where I would say a lot of times just the BAS as a whole being more customized is because we're transitioning kind of between our traditional MSTP over to a lot more IP stuff. And when
Mhm.
you
Mm.
get IP, your whole system architecture now can look very much different. Instead of having that traditional architecture with your supervisory device, now you have variable options of connecting your controllers, advanced hybrid controllers directly to your network without having to use a supervisor,
Mhm.
connecting them with each other. So I think it's becoming very much more customizable. I'll put it that way. I'm not
Yeah.
sure if we're trending more towards
Mhm.
that. And eventually I think that will lead to more standardization because
Right.
as we shift over to that, I think things will become a lot more standard as we
Yeah,
move away from a lot of the older, antiquated technologies we used to use on that.
Right. Yep. No, I
definitely.
I definitely agree with that. Yeah, custom logic, I mean, still required for those very custom jobs, which I think we're going to see more in the future due to more energy efficiency guidelines and requirements. And every
Mm,
building's going to be unique. It's not all the same.
yeah,
A school is going to
right.
be different than a fancy art building that has windows all over it, just pure
Mhm.
windows. So
Right.
the heat load's going to be different. So we got to control it differently. We got to put different sensors to monitor spaces to do that.
Yeah, yeah, I would again, and then you look back at like if you were a or a design build company that only did retail spaces and you were doing 100 Nike stores, most of them look and feel all the same. And so that way I would say they're more standardized.
Oh
So
yeah. Yep,
it
definitely.
does depend on the construction a lot, I think.
Absolutely. Okay, good answers. I like that. Let's go to the next question that we have here. What makes retrofitting controls in older buildings more complex? Okay, we're talking about a controls retrofit, older building, old equipment.
Yeah, I think we kind of touched on it a little bit, but one thing is obviously the outdated
Mm,
infrastructure or how
mm,
everything is getting faster and more advanced and our technology is advancing. And so the outdated infrastructure really can affect that how the systems communicate.
mhm. Very
Yeah, and I
good.
think I hear a lot from students and mentors out there where they may be coming across some of the stuff that's more line based or Modbus or one of the other protocols that's kind of fizzling out a little bit. I mean, we still see
Mm,
that stuff a lot, but if you're going back and you're doing retrofit work and you've got wires inside of walls or you have different things that aren't compatible with your new controllers or your new system, that's really hard. That's really aggravating to go through and have to pull a new wire across a
Mm.
ceiling once the ceiling's already there.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
or
and
block
You
wall.
exactly, yeah. You're
yeah,
converting over to a new
exactly.
protocol, again, going back to IP based, if you're pulling, Ethernet cable through there, Cat 5, 6, whatever you're pulling versus the stranded twisted pair, that's that's kind of complicated. And then integrating it with the existing system can also be a pain.
Right.
Yeah, and I'll tack onto that and kind of my background with HVAC. A lot of times getting ductwork in small spaces is difficult. And obviously, the older the building, the smaller the plenum, the more pipes and wires and everything that are existing that have been abandoned or not demoed. And so a lot of times we're trying to find routing for our ductwork. So it really, I would say, it applies to any type of system we're trying to get in there. But I would say lack of spaces can be pretty challenging.
Yeah, and you hit on something else as well, talking about all the stuff that's left over in there, just trying to identify, the right
wiring
wire,
for sure.
which line is this,
Oh yeah.
You trace it out for half an hour, then you end up finding it's
Mhm.
been cut and it's not even used anymore. Yeah.
Exactly.
Exactly. Yep. And I'll just add on too, these older buildings, I think, to be honest, it all starts in the estimate and the takeoff. Being a former estimator, it's very important. You go in these older buildings on these retrofits. These are going to be very unique, very old, very antiquated. There might not be any schematics at all. So you need to send someone out there with a little bit of experience. Someone needs to know a pneumatic system before you send them out to do an estimate or a takeoff or a design on a retrofit from pneumatic to DDC, just to make sure everything's covered. Things like you guys mentioned, conduit, reusing existing wires, making sure wires are marked. All these things need to be figured in that estimate because some of these retrofits can be very time consuming if they're not factored or found out before the technician gets out there. That's the last thing we want to do is just give the technician a job and make them find everything, because that's going to add tons of hours to your job. And it's going to be
that's a really good
nightmare.
point when you talk about bringing an experienced estimator out there, because a lot of that stuff, that's the only way you're going to know is through experience. You
Right.
can train somebody on what it takes to do the conversion all day long, but if they don't see that, that block wall right there is poured, that's a solid block wall,
Yeah.
that's gonna be like, most of the time they can kind of walk through the job and just have a general feel of, this is going to be about 50% more labor than we
Yes,
typically
exactly.
do,
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll add another challenge is the efficiency gaps. And so how things are designed now, as opposed to maybe whenever this was built 40 years ago,
Yeah.
our standards have changed and a lot of our code has changed. And so sometimes retrofitting to equipment may take re-engineering of the other equipment like our HVAC or our lighting. So we have that gap to bridge as well.
It's always true. Anytime you touch a piece of equipment, you always risk now you have to bring everything associated with it up to
That's
code,
right.
like you're saying.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
That can be quite expensive
Right.
as that goes through there. All right.
Definitely.
Very good. Good job, guys. I like that. Good. Now let's go to the next question. Unless there's anything else, I'd like to talk about wireless sensors and wireless communication. We're seeing that it's been in development for at least 15 years or so. It's becoming more popular. I was going to ask you in my next question, are wireless solutions helping retrofit installations, or is it still kind of like a niche market, just a niche thing? Is it niche or niche? I think it's niche.
Niche
Okay, I'll
market.
call it niche.
Niche.
I guess it
Call it
depends on where
niche.
you're from.
Yeah.
Niche.
I think niche. Yeah. I don't know.
Niche
Yeah, there
if
we go.
you're, from, I don't
Niche.
know, Switzerland or somewhere maybe.
There you go.
I love the wireless technologies and what we can do with it. I don't know that it's really been widely adopted yet from the industry, from what I'm hearing and seeing, but I think there's so many options available that when you have things like in-ocean or whether you're using the Zigbee protocol, I think a lot of it's going to boil down to that. What I've personally seen is that a lot of the wireless is proprietary. This OEM has this wireless communication that it's only going to talk to their own controller.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yep.
So that's a big part of it too, which would require you to replace. Well, they're all really going to require you to replace controllers to use it, but it does get around, circumvents all that trying to pull wire throughout the entire building. And there's a lot of really good products on this as well. I did one of our courses on wireless, and doing my research, there was a lot out there I was not aware of. And looking at it, I was like, oh wow, these would be some amazing solutions for a lot of applications. I might order several for my house.
There you go.
Just to control it all.
Case.
Right, exactly.
It's all good until a comm failure, and then your house goes down.
Now there's the other side of it. I wasn't going to get into that. I'll let you handle that. But
okay.
now we're getting.
I'll be the bad guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm theory. You can do the real world.
That's okay.
I was going to say, in theory, there are obviously a lot of benefits or pros to having wireless stuff. I mean, you have your flexibility and scalability. I mean, the fact that you can use these in any kind of system is huge. And also, I would say cost savings from a labor standpoint. I mean, we kind of talked about how long somebody might be out there wiring all this or routing all this wiring. If we eliminate that, we eliminate quite a bit of labor, and so that's a big cost savings there.
No, I agree. Yeah, it can be cost savings if it goes well. If you ever
fair.
worked on a wireless job, if it goes well. Now, if it doesn't go well, and
Yeah,
you
and you're
spend time
troubleshooting.
troubleshooting and then
Right.
ordering a replacement sensor, then all your labor savings just went away. But you know, most of the time it works pretty good. You just got to be aware of some things. If there's any other frequencies in the
Yes,
customer building that can interfere, but once you get that,
again, going back to those poured walls, if you have a lot of metal, a lot of poured walls or something, sometimes it's hard to get that wireless signal back up there to your controller.
Yep.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? That's still an issue. I mean, when you have the dense walls, it's still affecting it.
Right. I think it's probably more so on Bluetooth and with some wireless as well. But there are definitely some protocols I think that can penetrate it, but they probably also penetrate your skull and go into your brain and fry it.
I know, right?
Yeah, probably.
There's a little fear there.
Well, my take on wireless, you know, it's a love-hate relationship with wireless. It's great sometimes, and sometimes it's not so great. Right now, where I see it being implemented is with, you know, any kind of like office building where they rent out office space and they remodel constantly. Any place that's going to remodel all the time, that's very advantageous to have a wireless sensor. You can just take it off the wall, walk over, and put it back somewhere else.
Right.
As long as it's in range of the controller, you don't have to do anything else. You're done. So that's a big advantage. Also, we're looking at a lot of AI stuff. We're looking at Internet of Things. We're looking at cloud computing, digital twinning, and running simulations and data analytics. So people might put in these sensors like a humidity sensor after the initial project's over. I'm like, oh yeah, we want to monitor humidity now because we have to have it for our special AI application. We also have to have CO2 and we have to have an occupancy sensor. Well, a lot of wireless sensors have all those capabilities built in these days, so you can just put it all in one setting. So that would be a good situation for wireless, in my opinion.
Yeah. One other drawback that I'll throw out, since we're just kind of hashing it out here, a lot of people don't take this in consideration, is when you're wireless, what do you not have? And that's a power supply.
Oh, yeah, true.
So you're going to have to run off of batteries or some type of natural power harvesting, like an Ocean does, basically like our old calculators with the little solar panels on the front of it.
Solar? Okay. I didn't know they did that.
So their whole product line is based off of all that energy harvesting.
Yeah, like a solar power
around to keep the controllers working. So
got it. That's cool.
Awesome.
All right. Very good. Yeah, they're mainly going to be for, you know, small scale projects. Obviously right now, I don't see a building that's going to have a wireless sensor for every single sensor. And if they use one, it's only going to be used when they need it, I think. And that's really what they are. They're just special resource, I guess, sensors to help carry the project when you need it. So that's kind of the way I see it.
Yeah, really good point.
Yep, makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask another question, guys, but it looks like we're kind of getting short on time here, so we might need to wrap up our podcast here. That way, we don't take too much time out of everybody's day. But hey, we really appreciate you guys joining us. So thank you very much for listening to our Smart Buildings Academy podcast, and we hope you learned a lot from this episode. If you found this episode valuable, please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcast or even Spotify if you listen to Spotify. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe. If you're watching this on LinkedIn, please share this with your LinkedIn network. That would be great. And as always, this episode that you're watching right now will be available on our website at podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/489. Okay, that's going to be our episode number 489. Everybody take care. Thank you very much. And we'll see you on the next one. Take care.